and welcome to the second part of the Chorley Network of Catholic Laities videos on catechesis. In the first video, we sort of learned about the general terms of catechesis, evangelization, what we're trying to do in these things, its place within the whole of the parish life. In this video, we're going to go into a bit more detail about Anne's programme, find out a bit more about that. And to help me with that, we're going to ask Liz to join us. And Liz is going to start off with the first question. So over to you, Liz.
Okay. Hi, Anne. Just wondering, could you give us an outline, a description of how the catechist system was before you started?
Yes, okay. We're talking about two parishes which worked together but were separate entities, if that makes sense. We had St John the Evangelist in Kirkdale, which had a number of catechists, and some of whom led sessions and some of whom assisted in sessions. And we had St Sylvester's parish, which is the neighbouring parish, which was short of catechists. Now, there had been somebody who had coordinated, but both priests felt that they needed to replace the coordinator position, but they also wanted to try and grow the programmes a little bit. And certainly St Sylvester's needed baptism catechesis, which was one of the main roles and responsibilities that I took on when I started. So there were foundations there. They'd begun the With You Always programme in the schools, and we're looking to take that forward.
Okay. Sorry, Liz. Do you want to ask another question?
No, I was just fascinated by the picture. It's okay.
Okay. I suppose if in Chorley we are going to try to take up the challenge of coming up with a catechetical programme for the deanery, a good point to understand this: where do you start? So, how did you get things? How did you get things moving?
Well, as I say, there were already certain things in place. I actually spoke to both Father Michael and to Father Graham about what was there and what else was needed, and I took the time to have a close look at what was actually going on and what needed to be begun. They gave me some names, some contacts. I had various meetings, some of them formal, some of them informal, where I got to know the people that I would be working with. At the time, the Pastoral Formation Group was running the course Being a Catechist, and that was a course that I had done, and which had sparked my interest. So I asked the team that was running that to come to the parishes and to run a similar course, and that got some people interested. Though the next question is going to be about barriers, and I think I could continue that without the question. I think what I was envisaging was that I was the coordinator of the teams. So there would be teams of people running baptism, and there would be teams of people running the With You Always. In practice, that is actually quite difficult to achieve. People were interested, but there were sometimes things which were preventing them from getting as involved as they perhaps wanted to be. So, for example, the timing of the catechesis, we had to pick the time that would suit the families, the times that would suit the parents for the baptism. And for many of the catechists, the times just didn't work because they were working or they were looking after children themselves. So the times that worked best for the schools didn't necessarily work best for the catechists. So that was something of a barrier. Excuse me. I think another issue with the catechists was that I think very, very many people want to support catechesis and would say, you know, I can do this, I can do that, I'll do the other. But it wasn't so much, and again, this is my opinion, it wasn't so much in the catechesis element that they needed training. It was in the self-esteem and the confidence to deliver to what in our area were extremely large numbers at that time. And I think there were people who would do that, but I think there were other people who continued to lack confidence.
So on that score, how then did you train them?
Well, I think this is very definitely a very difficult question for me to answer, because my first aim was and still is to encourage people to come forward rather than to train them. Later on, I've been thinking, you said if there was one thing that you would do differently, or if there were things you would do differently, that is one thing that I would do differently. I went to the substance too quickly, and I should have looked at where people were in terms of their self-perception, of feeling skilled enough, feeling confident enough to deliver the catechesis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think people hear the word, I'll go back to language again because I think it's important. I think people hear the word catechesis and they find that off-putting. They think it's something very demanding. It is in its way, but you know what I mean? They think you have to possibly have a degree in theology or be super high flyer in the world of religious education, neither of which I am. And in fact, it isn't. And so I think if I was starting again, I would take several steps back and practice what I preach in my catechesis, because I've said to you, accompany people where they are, and I think that's what I should have done. I think I made a dangerous presumption that because people were catechists or being called catechists in the parish possibly, that they felt sorry, let me start that again. because they were being called catechists, I presumed that they had the confidence already to deliver, and that was a wrong and a dangerous presumption. I think there was another issue as well, in that people were aware that I was a, if you like, the paid coordinator, and they saw themselves as volunteers, and for some reason had a tendency to undersell themselves. Oh, I'm only a volunteer. That they felt somehow, I hope they didn't feel intimidated, but somehow they felt unworthy to do it. And that is perhaps, that was an error I made. That was a mistake I made, which I'm freely admitting to now. And in other times, I've learned I should have been working on enabling people. So maybe starting people with something they were comfortable with, focusing on their preferences, in terms of, you know, where in the catechesis they felt more able than in others. I think when we worked as a team, when we realised the need that we had to produce our own materials, and teamwork became more front and centre, that was better, because people felt more ownership of the materials and therefore had greater confidence. I think the materials themselves, certainly in our pastoral area, the pre-packaged materials initially were a barrier. So
is that because they were a barrier because people weren't familiar with them or didn't feel ownership of them, or?
I think there were a number of things. I think they didn't feel ownership of them, and from my point of view as a teacher, I know that from having stepped into a classroom on a cover lesson and being asked to teach somebody else's lesson plan, you can do it, but I don't ever think it's quite as effective as when those materials have come from you, for those particular people. So I think the fact initially that they were pre-packaged, preordained what we did and said at every stage, I think that was something of a barrier for us. It may not have been for other areas, but it was for us. Presumptions were made in the pre-packaged material about faith literacy, for example, that, as I said earlier, may not have existed. Nobody's fault. It just may not have been there. And so I think that definitely was one reason. But I think also, yes, we've changed them. The materials that we use now bear little or no resemblance to the materials that we were given initially. And that process began 8 years ago, and it's still ongoing. We never stop evaluating, and we never stop adapting what we have, what works, what doesn't work. It's actually quite complex.
I think you're definitely confirming in the introduction to the videos that you know, this is a big big challenge for the Catholic community to try to get all these things sorted. I'm going to ask you some questions about numbers and all that, but if you don't mind me asking another unscripted question, you said that you didn't have to, you don't have to have a theological degree, or you don't need to be really, really deeply knowledgeable about your faith to be a catechist. What would you say is a fundamental requirement? What do you need to be a good catechist? If it's not an encyclopedic knowledge of the faith, what is it that you need to have to be a successful catechist?
I think there are a number of things. I think you need to be extremely motivated to engage the people that you're working with. I think you need to be very sensitive to their needs in terms of not just content, but in terms of how you put that content across, in terms of where they're coming from with their faith and with their lives. So I think you need to be somebody who is willing to start with community and be passionate about your faith, but also be passionate about your community. And you put the two together, and with a sensitivity and learning experience and a willingness to learn from failure, I think that's what you need.
Okay, Liz, have you got any questions you want to ask?
The only other questions we need to look at in real terms is some of your numbers, really. I mean, how many catechists have you got covering your 2 parishes?
Right. Well, here I've got to be quite honest. We don't have a huge number. I'm not going to split them between the parishes, because we tend to work, because I work in both parishes, then any catechist would work in both parishes.
Yeah.
Now, if you also include amongst the catechists the people who work with the children in the Children's Liturgy of the Word, then I would say that we would have probably 6, which might surprise you, but that can go quite a long way.
I'm assuming there are committed 6.
Yes.
Do you pick many up, or is it possible to pick any catechists up from parents or even older young people who want to then go on to become catechists themselves? Is there any sort of way of picking those people up as well?
We've picked, in terms of parents, we have parents who have come to the faith through the catechesis, and but would have the abilities and the personal qualities to be excellent catechists. But the commitment needed precludes some people from taking that on. Certainly people's family life, people's work commitments make it quite difficult. This is what I said before when I said it was a very complex situation. When we've been running the family catechesis and the baptism to some extent, we've had to put our timings in to enable people to come and participate in the catechesis. And that has been the priority. Some of those times and some of those situations haven't been enabling for our parents, but it's very difficult to make any changes to those without interfering with attendance otherwise. Now, I can only say that, Elizabeth, from my experience. I think every pastoral area will have its own barriers. Some may be similar, some may be very distinct and different. But in the situation where I've been working, it has been, that has, certainly with the parents, that has been a challenge. We have had some young people who have shown very willing to take part in, not in catechesis at the moment, but reading at Mass. And some of the older children have become Eucharistic ministers in their schools.
That shows great promise for the future, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so, yes.
Do the parishes have a little church?
We do, yes.
How have you found getting parents to become involved and commit to that?
That has difficult. That is quite difficult, and I think there are differences. And now I'm not speaking about my work area or necessarily my home parish, but I know from conversations that engaging parents into children's liturgy of the word has been approached differently in different parishes. In some parishes, parents are actively encouraged to be a part of the children's liturgy group, to come in with their little ones and to share and to join in. And I think when that happens, parents do become interested and tend to start to join in without even realising it. In other parishes, maybe there hasn't been the encouragement for parents to actually be part of that for, you know, a variety of different reasons.
Okay. Final question. Perhaps it's a bit of a summary of what we've said, but how much is your catechetical programs about content, and how much is it about building a relationship with Jesus?
It's it's about how Jesus's example in his life, in his work, in his relationships, in his teaching. It's about how Jesus can come to be a part of our lives, and how he can support us and strengthen us. And we start with them. So it's a putting Jesus alongside their lives. It's not something separate. It's not something unachievable. Jesus is there with them. And it's about talking to people. When we talk about Jesus, we talk about Jesus and them together.
That's great. Liz, have you got any questions?
No, I must admit I am fascinated with what your programme is and love to see it, but actually I don't have any questions at this stage.
Okay. I think I want to say thanks as well to Anne. We could talk about it all night, and we've hardly touched on the kinds of activities you have, the kinds of things, community things you do. Perhaps that'd be an opportunity for another video. But I think we'll call this one to a halt now, and let you know that for the next video in the series, we're going to have a look back and say, well, if the catechetical program has been successful, what signs are there in the community that it has been successful? So we'll ask Anne a few questions about that when we are in the next video. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.